Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Web3 Watchdogs, the podcast that takes a deep dive into the world of Web3 security, compliance, fraud, and scams. And today, our guest is a Web3 entrepreneur, a veteran security expert, and a true OG in the crypto space, Adam Healy. Adam is the CEO of Station 70 that provides key backup and recovery to institutions using self-custody wallets. Adam, I'm sure you're going to explain this in a second, but a few more words about yourself. Adam was a serial chief security officer after working at BlockFi and Bucked and DACC, which stands for Digital Asset Custody Company, that was later acquired by Bucked. He has also worked for Microsoft and for the US government. And none less important, if you can see the flag behind Adam. Adam is also a veteran of the Marine Corps. He served overseas, so it's even more impressive in my humble point of view. So Adam, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me and for such a humbling intro. Good to be here and good to spend some time talking together.
Perfect. Is there anything I've missed in your intro? Anything that you would like to highlight?
No, I think you covered everything. Well, we probably won't veer too much up into my personal hobbies. But yeah, just glad to be here, talk about security, talk about the state of Web3. I don't know that everyone would categorize me as an OG of the space, but I've been around a little while. I've seen some pretty crazy things on the security front. We'll probably talk about a few of those. And yeah, just glad to be here.
Yeah, we'll definitely dive into the juicy stories. But maybe first, tell us a little bit about Station 70, your latest venture, for the listeners that maybe are not familiar with it.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So, really the whole idea of Station 70 came from my time at Bakkt as Chief Information Security Officer, and then my time later, just about 3.5, 4 years at BlockFi as in the same role there. Was the security team, we saw a lot of different failure modes starting to emerge across the industry, and a big one of those was this massive inflow into self-custody. That in and of itself is not a failure mode. We actually work very closely with firms like Fireblocks and Fortify and others, and we're big fans of their technology. But the failure mode came from how do you back up those keys, right? Being your own bank is hard. At the end of the day, that is a really challenging, really daunting, very technically complex problem. So the idea really came from, at BlockFi, at Bakkt, we had to build a lot of really custom, really secure infrastructure to back up our private keys that allowed us to manage our custody operations. There wasn't really a good enterprise institutional grade solution for that was generalizable to a lot of firms, right? Not many firms can have, at BlockFi, we had 7 people on our cryptography security team. Most firms can't support that as a function of their business. So what if we built a product suite that allowed you to do things like key backup and recovery, disaster recovery, business continuity across your private key ecosystem, regardless if you're a custodian that has your own infrastructure, or you're a custodian that's white labeling like a Fireblocks product, or you're a hedge fund that's using Fireblocks to trade. How do we enable kind of secure key backup and recovery? And that's what we've built in our Bunker product. We have some other products that will be coming out soon over the next 0 to 24 months to really just start solving broader security challenges across the industry that we think are that are very existential to the future of the space.
Yeah, I think that you made a very interesting point about the fact that people and companies want to be their own banks, but they don't really understand what does it entail, right? It's much complicated and perilous than just this romantic notion.
Yeah, and I'm a person who I read the Bitcoin white paper, when probably the first 6 months of it coming out, and I believed it, right? I was like, this concept of divorcing politics from money really resonated with me. And obviously it's interesting, we're recording this on November 5th, the election day here in the States. There's an American flag behind me. And even with that and being a patriot, I think there's a lot to be said about separating the two. The catch there is whether you're a Main Street investor, mom and pop, or you're a sophisticated Wall Street firm or a hedge fund or something like that, managing crypto assets, digital assets broadly in a secure way, aka being your own bank in the Web3 ecosystem, is very difficult. And at the end of the day, you're dealing with bearer instruments. There's no third party to call to get that wire back. If you send crypto to the wrong address, or you use the wrong blockchain, or you send it to a rogue address or a scam or something like any flavor of things, you're kind of on your own now, and you have to have the infrastructure in place to do that. And obviously the spectrum of that infrastructure varies from, like I said, the mom and pop individuals to more sophisticated firms. And we obviously are releasing products really catered to institutions and those firms that even are incredibly sophisticated, and then also institutions that we would categorize as, say, family offices or smaller hedge funds or things like that, and kind of everything in between. And what we have found is that product is really well received, because this is people, when they start to really unpack crypto, they start to realize that, yeah, being your own bank is hard. There are a lot of security things that we're not experts in. We might be experts in trading or running a market making operation or something like that, but we're not experts in these other things and protecting those bearer instruments. And that's where we're seeing a lot of traction.
Yeah, I totally have to agree. There's a huge discrepancy between the talent that companies have with respect to, like you've mentioned, let's say trading, and with how they're safeguarding their assets, and it's really a shame. I think that this gap is one of the biggest challenges right now.
Yeah, I think, and there's others too, right? We can talk about some other products that we have coming. We will have a retail product come out actually next year that solves some similar problems around key backup, recovery, disaster recovery, etc., for retail users across a number of different wallets that they may use. But there are absolutely security holes that need to be filled industry wide, retail institutions. And our vision really is around just kind of increasing that trust and safety across the entire industry. Bunker's our first product, and we've got a lot more work to do.
So we'll talk about the difference between institutional and retail, and a little bit more about how do you guys want to go about it. But first, I can't help but ask. You've mentioned that you've worked with BlockFi, and you were the chief security officer, and we all remember the SIM swap hack.
Sure.
So perhaps you can share something like behind the scenes, what happened, and maybe also some insights now in hindsight. How did the infrastructure in the incumbent companies have changed or not?
Yeah. Yeah, there's probably a couple dimensions to that story. So that SIM swap, May 14th, I believe, of 2020, that was the actual SIM swap that caused me to get hired at BlockFi. So about maybe 6 weeks before that, the last happy hour that I went to pre-COVID in New York City was with Zach Prince, Renee Van Kesteren, Jessica Rayback, some other, Laura Edelman. These are all folks that I think we all know. They're pretty popular in the crypto space, and we all had some drinks. I think we were down in Soho in New York City, and within the next couple of weeks, COVID unfolds. So everyone's kind of at their bug out location or their cabin in the woods or their bunker or whatever you're at, and I get this email from Zach Prince that says, "Hey, security stuff," in the subject line. "When can you talk?" And it was like Friday at, like, I don't know, 8 a.m. or something. And, I had things going on that day. And I said, well, let's talk like Monday or Tuesday. Here's some times. And he goes, "Well, how about, do you have some time today? It's urgent." I was like, so as a security practitioner, and, you've been in the space a while, when you get that email, when the call starts, the first thing you ask is what happened? Because no one really calls me on a Friday morning unless there's something bad has happened. So come to find out, there was the SIM swap that unfolded, and Zach says, "Hey, the job's yours if you want it. When can you start?" I'm like, we have some discussion, and I start in basically immediately, but I start officially like a week or so later. And what happened was a employee's credentials were compromised through a SIM swap. Now, what does that mean? that meant there were a couple things that I still see as failure modes today at even sophisticated large institutions in crypto, which is mind-boggling to me. But there was a particular setting at the time in Google Workspace that allowed users to reset their password if they had their 2FA token. So in this case, the employee's credentials were the single point of failure was that SMS text message for 2FA. And at the time at BlockFi, you could use SMS as a 2FA option. Obviously, that quickly changed once I got there. But so this employee's credentials were compromised. His SIM card got swapped. Now the threat actor had access to the 2FA token, which allowed them to do a password reset successfully, which then allowed them to basically walk right in the front door and get access to some basically CRM type data, name, email address, and things like that for a chunk of the BlockFi user base. Now, the sad reality is, and there's some irony here, is let's fast forward 4 years. We all probably remember the series of bankruptcies that happened at firms like Genesis, BlockFi, FTX, Celsius, and others. And all of that KYC data for all of those firms ended up through the bankruptcy process stored at a company called Kroll, Kroll. And I get a call, oddly, same, early in the morning. This is 4 years after I started at BlockFi, from someone that says, "Hey, Kroll just had a data breach." Come to find out, it was the exact same problem. An individual at Kroll had his SIM swapped, allowed the account to be taken over, allowed the threat actor to log into Kroll's SharePoint site and download all of this KYC data for all of the creditors for all of these bankruptcies. So I say that and I tell that story because, Kroll is a sophisticated, large multinational company, and they were still using SMS as 2FA. So, I think that is probably one of the most salient points. If anyone that watches this, whether you're a CFO or a CEO or a board member, if you go to your security team or your CTO or your CISO and ask, "Are we using SMS for 2FA?" You have some hard discussions in front of you, in my opinion. So that's kind of the lesson learned. My first day at BlockFi was, we're talking to the FBI. They're asking a bunch of questions. We have all of these emails coming in. It was pretty chaotic, but at the end of the day, we ended up putting together a really good team on the security team at BlockFi, and even more broadly, I think the BlockFi team has gone on to do some great things, and we were able to solve that problem and move on. At the end of the day, it wasn't a big issue long term. It was a big issue at the time in the moment. We quickly put some controls in place and got our hands around it and solved that problem.
Yeah, the good news was that it was a data breach or potential breach, and it wasn't an asset leakage at the end of the day, right? Because just to give you some numbers from our own proprietary data, we've actually found in CyVers that about 80% of Web3 related hacks have actually originated from Web2 related platforms, right? So it's a very good example of how this world of Web3 doesn't really live in a bubble, because at the end of the day, you have some points of connection, some endpoints that connect you to Web3, and then you can steal not only data, but also funds.
Yeah, it's really interesting you say that, because so much of Web3, if we just call it that, relies on Web2 technology. I would argue that the vast majority of Web3 firms are using some combination of Azure Active Directory, Okta, or Auth0 for their customer authentication into their environment. Those are all Web2 technologies. Those are all run by large organizations. All, I think, are publicly traded. And that's a problem. And what I find, it's funny, I just got off a call with an unnamed firm right before this conversation, and I was explaining to them this view that I have of the majority of data breaches in Web3 stem from bad security on the enterprise context, not necessarily a threat actor attacking the cryptography head on, compromising an MPC library, sophisticated supply chain attack. Most of the data breaches are, really, I say there are three controls that I harp on all the time. And I've seen, very sophisticated publicly traded companies that we know in the Web3 space and in the broader fintech space not do these things. And it's, have very rigid 2FA, multi-factor authentication controls on all of your accounts, everything across the board. Have device trust deployed. You should only be able to log into sensitive infrastructure from trusted devices. And that could include Slack, that could include email, obviously payment infrastructure, etc. Trusted devices. So, Okta Device Trust or some type of domain join if you're in the Windows environment. And the third is network cloud egress controls into like a default deny state. You can't tell me your infrastructure in the cloud is secure if you do not know what's leaving your cloud environment. So if I can hop on an EC2 instance in your cloud environment and I can hit google.com, you have failed. You don't know what's leaving your environment. Therefore, you have no way to tell me your environment is secure. So, all outbound connections from your cloud environment or your co-load servers or whatever you have should be explicitly default deny, and everything should be explicitly whitelisted to be allowed out. So if you have those three controls, you're not bulletproof, you're not great, but you are considerably ahead of the vast majority of your peers in the industry.
Do you think that in the current Web3 space, and let's take, I don't know, the top 10 projects right now, let's go to the CeFi space because
Sure.
DeFi is more kind of Wild West. Do you think, in your opinion, that the awareness to the issues that you've raised right now, those kind of basic practices of how to protect your environment, do you think it's there among
No.
the CTOs, the CISOs?
Having talked to hundreds, and I'm not exaggerating, hundreds of institutions over the last 7 years, and of that, speaking majority to the CTO or the CISO or the risk committee at a lot of these organizations, I can say that there is not a good awareness of what the core controls are, right? A lot of folks think, hey, we've got a SOC 2, maybe we did an ISO audit, maybe we did a NIST audit, we're good. The reality is no. The example I always like to use is November 2015, Home Depot had the largest credit card breach in the history of ever, right? 80 million credit cards ended up for sale on the dark web. The year before, they had a good PCI audit, they had a good SOC 2 audit, they had a good ISO audit, but they still had a data breach. Those are compliance controls, which should not be confused with pragmatic security controls. That being said, I don't know that it is fair to indict all of those firms. I think the reality is we in the security community, and I catch some decent amount of flack for this, for saying this, is we in the security community are really good at gatekeeping, and that's bad. We're really good at mystifying security into this, you must be able to see in the seeing stones all of these different things and build these complex frameworks and all this. And kind of, but the reality is there's 5 or 10 or 15 controls that you could implement today and be considerably ahead of the vast majority of the market, and they're not hard to implement. And I don't know why that is, but I think one of those reasons is we don't have good tooling around that. And that's partly why we started Station 70, right? We wanted to first solve this issue around key backup, disaster recovery, business continuity, right? If we would have been involved in the Prime Trust infrastructure prior to their issues, that would have not happened, right? Like if they would have had backup keys for those wallets before they swept funds, like, so we wanted to really solve that, but we have some other products that we'll be releasing. I don't know how much you want to talk about the one product that we've been talking about, but we have an identity product that we'll be releasing next year that really starts to harden up some of these Web2 identity problems that we continue to see in Web3. We have a retail disaster recovery private key backup product that will be coming next year. So yeah, I think we as security practitioners owe it to the industry, and obviously, there's financial incentives for us to do this, right? We're selling products at the end of the day, but we owe it to the industry to build more accessible, better tooling around the infrastructure as it exists today to make security easier to do.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And by the way, with to piggyback on what you're saying, with the story of I think Home Depot you mentioned, I think it kind of resembles a recent hack that took place and that we discovered was Erex, right? So I always say that if you would take a look at their security infrastructure, so they had the safe multi-sig wallet, and they had a custodian that was basically managing all their policies, and they had a ledger as one of the signers, and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, all these systems failed and they got hacked. And I think that one of the reasons for that is the fact that you have to always expect the unexpected, right? So you mentioned that we're gatekeepers, but there are certain gates that maybe you haven't thought of. So I think that's also a very important lesson, that you need to have tools that don't only fit the existing and known problems, but you need to have kind of a more blanket cover for future problems that may arise.
Yeah, and that's why I think those three controls I mentioned, having strong multi-factor authentication. We're big fans of YubiKey devices, hardware tokens, things like that. Having network controls, having device trust controls. I can't tell you what issue device trust is going to solve tomorrow for us, but I can tell you the 7, 8, 9, 10 common attack vectors that we see, that it does solve is just kind of like a hammer, right? Like everything's kind of a nail and that's a hammer, and it works. In those three controls, I think, are very high ROI and very, very valuable. And the conversation can easily get more into, like, how do you design defense in depth, and how do you account for those unknowns? And at the end of the day, my contention is that over a long enough time horizon, every company will have a data breach, because it's very hard to always be in that kind of defensive posture, right? You have to get lucky every time. The bad guy only has to get lucky once. So over a long enough time horizon, every company will have some security incident. It's how quickly can you, well, one, it's how do you minimize that to the greatest degree that you can to push that time horizon out as far as you can. But it's when those bad things do inevitably happen to any company that's connected to the internet today, it's how quickly can you identify, contain, and remove that threat from the environment. Those are really the measures of a good security program.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. So we talked about retail, we talked about institutional, but I think that now there's kind of a grade that is even above the your regular institutional, which is all the ETF providers, right? So ever since the Bitcoin ETFs were approved, and then the Ethereum ones, so money started flowing in. Actually, right before the call, I took a peek at Bitcoin ETF tracker, and I saw that they have 82 billion market cap already under management. So it's huge numbers, and we can expect more money flowing in. We'll talk about the election soon and the expectations with what's going to happen, but maybe this will also affect it. So my question is, how do you view this field, and does it have any unique security features and measures that they have to implement? Because just another point of information here, I think like 2 months ago, the FBI issued a warning that North Korean hackers, and primarily the Lazarus Group, are eyeing ETF, Bitcoin, basically. And this is, growing to be a huge problem. And we can imagine that such huge sums, and at the end of the day, it's institutionals managing institutionals, but we have some retail money that is the source of all that. And it's enough that one of those institutions will be hacked to have a huge scandal. Again, India had with Xerox. I hope that US doesn't have, I don't know, BlackRock or something like that, knock on wood. How do you view that?
I think for the ETF issuers, I don't know that it materially changes the threat posture for them. These firms or most of them are very well-known firms. I think about Fidelity, I think about some of these others, and they're under constant assault from rogue individuals, rogue threat actor groups, rogue nation states on a constant basis. You can look at whether it's the Verizon data, the breach report, or the Cloudflare publishes a lot of numbers on threats that they interdict prior to it even getting to infrastructure. I don't know that it materially changes it. I think what, especially because they're outsourcing custody. Now we can talk about centralized custody risk. The majority of that being at Coinbase is potentially a problem. from from an ecosystem, from an industry that wants to talk about decentralization. Is that an issue? Maybe not, but maybe. Coinbase obviously has a phenomenal track record on security, phenomenal track record more recently on uptime, knock on wood. They obviously had some challenges on availability over the years. But I think the issuers, the biggest issues that they're going to have are going to be around protecting the systems, the keys, the infrastructure that accesses and interacts with those custodians. And I would like to believe that they've got a lot of rigor attached to that. One of the failure modes that I've seen at large institutions, a couple very well-known institutions, some Fortune 500 that have started to do things in the crypto space, is they want to be able to treat their crypto infrastructure just like their other infrastructure. So if we're a payments company and we're getting involved in crypto through our payments infrastructure, we already have HSMs. So we're going to treat those HSMs for crypto just like the HSMs for payments. So the payments engineering team has access to those HSMs, and there's, and I think that is an issue where institutions need to really think about, how do we have special controls around the infrastructure for crypto? Because at the end of the day, like I said earlier, these are bearer assets, right? These are bearer instruments, and there is no clawback. There's no calling the other bank and getting the wire returned. So you do need to add some additional rigor. To your point around the FBI's report in North Korea, that's been an open secret now for, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years. I don't even know, right? Like, where for a while it was alleged, and I don't know, I've been out of the government world for a while at this point, and no one tells me anything that they shouldn't, but that North Korea was using stolen crypto to finance their nuclear program. There's there's discussions about Iran doing similar things. Like, it's, I don't know, right? Like, there once upon a time I probably would have known some of that detail. I don't anymore, for sure. But I think where we've definitely have seen issues when it comes to rogue, whether it's folks like North Korea, rogue nation states, or threat actor groups, you mentioned Lazarus and others, is getting hired at some companies. And that now creates this massive insider threat problem that I think had only really been seen at one other firm in the last 10 years or so. And I won't name the firm, but there was a case a handful of years ago where some interns interned at a crypto company, went back to the university. While they were back at the university, they were approached and recruited to basically return to that company and install some malware on some wallet infrastructure systems. And they were caught. There was an FBI engagement. There's a whole thing unfolded from that. But I think as we're starting to see these threat actor groups mature, I think we now have to really focus on kind of insider threat being a very real problem. And that's another category of risk that I don't think most institutions are ready to address and ready to deal with, right? I just think most people want to think that they trust their employees. I used to wear a lanyard back in my IC days where it said, in God we trust, all others we polygraph. So, I don't know that we're going to get polygraphs adopted across the industry, but, I come from a world where we used to polygraph everyone on a regular basis. So yeah, I think,
I gotta say, this industry is so decentralized, and it takes pride in it, right? But it also has some. It can also backfire, right? Because at the end of the day, it's not your classic corporate environment where your employee, you vet the employee. Oftentimes, it's just some meme photo and some nickname behind your employee. And you might think that, if he's writing the code in a satisfactory way, then it's good for me. But I think that, some companies need to mature and to understand that they need to figure out who they're hiring.
Yeah, I mean, we don't hire the meme photo people without knowing them, right? Like, we have very rigid security requirements at Station 70, as you can imagine. We do obviously thorough background checks. We do background checks periodically. It's not just at the time of hire. We redo them on a random basis for employees and contractors with certain systems access, right? We don't necessarily need every contractor that maybe is they don't have systems access, or they're they're writing some blog post for us and emailing it to us. But for anyone with like systems access or access to important information, we background check everyone kind of on a periodic basis. And that's also not a silver bullet, right? Background checks don't kind of always go there. You need good detective controls around your infrastructure, around your systems, to identify a nefarious behavior. I think one of the best places for people that are interested in insider threat to work is in the crypto industry. It's partly what keeps me interested in the space. Is it's a really interesting intersection of things that I'm interested in, which includes things like insider threat, physical security, cybersecurity, other technical security that's kind of not really cybersecurity, but other things that are kind of adjacent, then don't fit neatly into the cyber or physical side. So I think it's a really interesting place to work. And there's a lot of data out there around insider threat that the Department of Energy in the US, who manages our nuclear program, and Carnegie Mellon have put out in the open source on insider threat. And I would tell anyone who's interested in kind of that topic to spend some time reading through some of that material.
Yeah, definitely. So, you mentioned earlier that we're recording this actually on election day.
We are.
And it seems, at least if you look at the polls, it seems like a very tight election race.
Yeah.
Every second now I have pop-ups on my Telegram saying, Trump is leading, Harris is leading, and so on. So let's admit that we don't know what's going to happen, right? We might have our theories about it. But let's assume, each side wins. What do you think the implications for crypto will be? And just to focus the answer more specifically with respect to regulation, because we saw during the last few weeks, Bitcoin and the other coins fluctuating, and everyone says, listen, Trump is leading, so Bitcoin is up, or the other way around. So what do you think?
It's a good question. I wish I had a crystal ball, because I'd be on Polymarket right now making a lot of money. I don't know what's going to happen. I think, from a crypto regulatory lens solely, I would say there was at one point some speculation that if one side won, Gary Gensler may become Secretary of Treasury. That would be very bad for the industry. There was another side that said that he was going to get fired, so that could potentially be very good for the industry. I think at a federal level in the US, because our elected officials can't seem to mobilize effectively on a coherent strategy, and our elected officials being Congress, the Senate and the House, it matters who is in the White House 100%. But I think there's so much dysfunction in Congress. The reality is we're not going to get comprehensive clarity on crypto policy at the federal level for the foreseeable future. Could that happen? Maybe. I just think we have a lot of problems in the United States, and therefore the world more broadly also has a lot of problems, right? We can look at the ongoing conflicts in the Middle East and Israel. We can look at the ongoing conflicts in Ukraine. We can look at what's happening in China and Taiwan. We can look at what's happening in Africa. We can look at what's happening in Cuba. I've been saying for years that we've turned a blind eye to what's happening in Cuba, and when the Chinese getting more and more involved in there, and no one seems to care, no one seems to be paying attention. So we have a lot of problems. And I think as an American, as a taxpayer, I would like to see Congress solve some of these much larger problems prior to focusing on crypto regulation, and just kind of take a more hands-off approach for maybe a term, 4 years or an 8-year period, and let things kind of settle. And what that would mean is it pushes things down to the states. And what we've seen in the US.
Yeah, but I gotta say, sorry to interrupt you. It doesn't necessarily contradict that, right? Because at the end of the day, when you create a comprehensive framework, this can actually attract funds and attract, companies.
Yeah.
Right now, the US is super ambiguous with respect to crypto regulation. I mean, you can look at what's happening in Europe, and you can say that the regulation there is very stringent, but at least it's clear. So I think that actually that's, if you want to grow the economy, that's actually something that you should focus on, to have a more comprehensive, a more clear infrastructure for regulation.
I don't disagree. I also don't know, though, that the levers that are available to grow the economy, I don't know that crypto's in the top 10 of those. If we think, on the multi-trillion dollar scale, there are a lot of levers that can be pulled by the federal government to, for lack of a better word, to manipulate the economy, to generate desired outcomes, which I think would be close to the definition of manipulate. And that's partly why, we as Station 70 and I think the broader industry, like, there's a lot of doubling down that's happening outside the US, right? Like, we are big fans of what's happening out in Singapore. We've spent a lot of time out there. We have some good relationships out there. We like what's happening in Dubai and in Israel and other places in the Middle East. There's a lot of innovation happening. And the sad reality is the US is just falling behind on that front, right? The country that should be leading this is, in my opinion, as an American, is not leading this because we can't seem to get out of our own way. I've got a lot of opinions on why that is. We won't necessarily get into those on this call, but I think the next, lacking some comprehensive framework on crypto at the federal level, the states will be more center stage. That is not good. I agree, for the industry. That is not good net for innovation and economic stimulation in the United States. But at the same time, as an entrepreneur, as a capitalist, I have to say that, like, we are very we're very much engaged within the Middle East. We're very much engaged within Singapore and even Latin America. Like, we've seen a big growth in Latin America, and we're happy to participate in those markets.
Yeah, it actually reminds me and you met like a couple of months ago in Singapore.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I found like really staggering there is the fact that you meet a lot of US nationals that live and work and build companies in East Asia, basically, Singapore, Thailand, Vietnam, all over the place. And when you ask them why did you decide to to leave the US and why did you decide to set up shop in East Asia, they usually tell you regulations, taxation. Definitely, Asia is really attractive to entrepreneurs right now, and I think that the US and Europe as well are really lagging behind with that.
Yeah, I mean, look, I feel like the United States has given me a lot, and therefore I want to build things here. But I have certainly thought about moving to Singapore, and there's a lot of reasons why it makes sense, both from an entrepreneurial perspective, but also from just an everyday individual perspective. There are a lot of reasons why I think Singapore would be probably on my like top 3 places to relocate to if it really came down to that.
Yeah. So we're almost out of time. Just a quick and general and very speculative question. How do you view the future, especially with respect to crypto security? Let's say in the next 5 years, what are we going to see? What type of new solutions? What type of new infrastructures that will emerge?
You know, I think we're going to see more adoption. I have been blown away in the last 2-3 years with the number of firms that have adopted interest, have somehow adopted, crypto, digital assets, other types of things in that ecosystem. And I think we're going to continue to see growth, right? Globally, even in the US, we're going to continue to see growth. That means we're also going to continue to see an expansion of bad actors looking to capitalize on that growth. And we're already seeing, very sophisticated phishing and deepfake campaigns in the wild, that are being facilitated by AI, and that's going to be a problem. And the defensive side of the house is going to have to adapt to that offensive side. But I would say we're also going to see kind of a thinning of the herd, right? We've seen some consolidation already. We've seen some custodian consolidation. We've seen some wallet provider consolidation. I think we're going to see some consolidation across the board within the industry, and that includes, consolidation of some security companies and some security capabilities. Because at the end of the day, like, and some of these firms also, right, that raised money 2 years ago at really high valuations and are having a hard time right now. And there's a lot of those firms in the industry, so I think that's going to fuel a lot of consolidation. And we'll see where we land. But I'm really excited about the next 5 years. I think the adoption is going to come. And in the U.S., I can only hope that we kind of get our act together on the federal side, and we get some type of framework in place that allows us to really unlock the innovation, because that's, I think, the biggest piece, right? The U.S. has so much pent up innovation in it, in its DNA, and any industry that is not enabled to capitalize on that is a net negative for the entire country, and in many cases the entire world. When we could think about some of the things that the U.S. has done, we apparently can't seem to innovate on how we count votes, because it takes us days and weeks. But that's a whole other topic. But I'm excited for the next 5 years, regardless.
So on this very optimistic note, I will thank you, Adam. In my opinion, it was a fascinating talk. We covered so many topics, and I feel that we'll need some sort of a follow-up to discuss some more. And also, we'll see how it goes in terms of the elections, in terms of the new administration, whichever it will be, and its approach to crypto. So thank you so much, Adam, and we'll definitely catch up again.
Sounds good, Michael. Thank you very much.
Web3 Watchdogs is powered by CyVers, your end-to-end solution for mitigating malicious activity in Web3. From hacks to scams, from fraud to compliance challenges, CyVers has got you covered. Serving some of the biggest names in the industry, their AI-powered engine is able to detect and eliminate threats before they happen. For more details, go to cyvers.ai/demo. That's CYVERS.ai.